Yes, General. Yella saluted again, then turned around and left. Wu Sheng's eyes moistened as he watched the Nuzan's resolute footsteps gradually disappear into the distance. He knew very well that the Nuzan Cavalry Division only had a little more than 8,000 people, and the White Russians still had 20,000 cavalry that had not moved. The White Russians were tall and strong, and they had immense strength. It was not guaranteed that they would win in a one-on-one battle. The ratio was close to 3-1, and the outcome of this battle was precarious. However, he had no other choice. If he didn't let the Nuzan Cavalry Division charge out now, once the city was breached, the advantage of the cavalry would be greatly reduced. That would be a huge loss. Looking at Lu Dai's departing figure, Wu Sheng knew that he might not return this time. His mood instantly became much more downcast. That night, both the Third Corps and the White Russians had a good night's sleep. They knew that the final battle would be tomorrow, and they had to use this opportunity to recuperate and preserve their strength for tomorrow's battle. However, on a mountain path a few hundred li away, a group of 20,000 cavalrymen was galloping quickly with 3 horses each. Under the limited moonlight, the cavalrymen were racing against time. They came like the wind and left like lightning, heading straight for Tove City. The sky was finally bright, and the White Russians outside the city started cooking. Steam rose from the camp, and smoke rose in spirals. In Tove City, Wu Sheng had already changed into a clean set of armor and walked out of the barracks. Last night, he gave the order to take out all the food in the city for the army's breakfast. For this reason, some of the White Russians in the city had their food stored and their homes searched, causing many people to cry. Wu Sheng couldn't care less about this. If these were Han people, he would rather starve to death than steal food from them. However, they were a foreign race. The 6th young master had said that those who were not of his race would have different intentions. Since that was the case, so what if they stole food? What could they do to him? If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame the White Russians led by Ivan outside the city. Both sides seemed to have foreseen something, and neither side was in a hurry. The breakfast lasted for 2 hours. At around 9 o'clock in the morning, the two sides finally got into position, ready to fight to the death. Cannons were pushed to the front of the White Russians. The black cannons were aimed at the walls of Tove City, ready to fire at any moment. General, why don't we capture some of the civilians and bring them up to the city walls? That way, the White Russians will have some reservations. The 1st Division's commander, Min Fu, suggested to Wu Sheng. No need. Wu Sheng shook his head without hesitation. He had already robbed the White Russians of their food, and he had already let them down. How could he joke around with their lives? Furthermore, based on his understanding of Ivan, even if he captured the White Russians and brought them up to the city walls, he would not stop Ivan from ordering the cannons to fire. It was still the same words. The other party was a ruthless person, a person who would not easily give up in order to achieve his goal. Since that was the case, why bother? Not only would it disgust Ivan, but it would also disgust him. After rejecting Min Fu's suggestion, Wu Sheng looked to his side. When he did not see Commander Yella, he knew that Yella was ready. With a sigh, he raised his head again, and his eyes were filled with determination. Everyone, listen to my orders. When the cannon booms, everyone find cover and hide. After the order is given, all soldiers will fire their bows and arrows. Let's give the enemy a fierce wave of attacks first. Wu Sheng was very familiar with cannons. After all, they were the Cold Vanguard Division's foundation, and they were the first to use guns and cannons. However, in the past few years, they had not received any support, and the Type 95 had run out of ammunition. Now, he had found a safe place to hide them. Since he had played with guns and cannons before, he knew the power of these things, so he had already prepared a countermeasure. After the soldiers heard the order, They responded in unison, under the leadership of the company commander, platoon leader, and squad leader. They each found a safe place to hide and took out all their bows and arrows, preparing for the final battle. Under the city gate tower, 20 cannons were slowly pushed forward. They stopped 300 meters away from Tov City, as if there was no one around. Some of the cannons of the White Russians were made by themselves, and some were bought from Western merchants. Some of the better cannons had a range of 3 to 4 kilometers, which was much better than the ones made by Ming. However, Ivan still gave the order to push the cannons to a distance of 300 meters. He did not want to create enough psychological pressure for the 5-star army to defend the city. After the 20 cannons were placed, Ivan rode on his horse and shouted from the middle of the army, giving the order to fire. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. The cannons shot into the sky and quickly landed on the city walls of Tov City. Immediately, a series of earth-shaking sounds could be heard. Then, rocks flew everywhere from the explosion. Pieces of the city walls also began to peel off, falling everywhere. Smoke and dust filled the sky, and the ground shook. At this moment, the 3rd Star Army could only hide and take the hits. They did not have the strength to fight back at all. The commander of the Wusheng army hid in a safe bunker. His face was dark the whole time. He thought to himself hopefully, "Just you wait. When the 6th young master comes, he will show you what a real cannon is. When that time comes, I hope you can still be so arrogant." It was as if he was chanting scriptures in his heart. After about half an hour, the sound of the cannons finally stopped. Wu Sheng opened his eyes and shouted, "The enemy is about to attack the city. Everyone prepare your bows and arrows." Under the city walls, after the sound of the cannons, the White Russians began to attack. In the previous cannon fire, not only did more than half of the city walls outside Tov City fall off, a part of the city walls also collapsed. This was a city wall made of mountain rocks. There was no cement to adhere to it, so it was indeed much worse in terms of sturdiness. There was a serious gap in the city walls, and the White Russians moved forward along the collapsed corner. The White Russians at the front were soldiers with shields in their hands. They were preparing to defend themselves against an attack from arrows. "Fire!" As Commander Wu Sheng shouted from the top of the city gate tower, tens of thousands of arrows were released. Countless arrows appeared from the sky and fell to the ground. The shields were effective, and in a short period of time, countless shields were pierced by arrows. One White Russian soldier after another fell to the ground due to the lack of protection, or some of the people who had been hit by arrows were howling on the ground. However, this was not enough to stop the battle. Even more White Russian soldiers raised their muskets and swords and charged forward. War was cruel, and this was especially true when a large number of White Russian soldiers took advantage of the opening and rushed up the tower. The most brutal close combat began. One side wanted to rush up the city walls and occupy this place. The other side wanted to defend this place and not allow anyone to rush up. When their goals were in conflict, the only thing that mattered was who had the bigger fist and who had the final say. On top of the city walls, after a large number of White Russian soldiers swarmed in, many soldiers from the 5-Star Army also charged out. They held swords, sabers, and spears in their hands as they charged at the White Russian soldiers, who were much taller than them. Chapter 14:15. Papa, 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 Papa. With the sound of gunfire and smoke rising, the soldiers of the 5-Star Army, who rushed forward, were hit by the bullets and fell to the ground with blood all over their bodies. The distance of a few dozen meters was filled with human lives. Taking advantage of the short distance and the time taken for the other side to reload their gunpowder, the two sides finally clashed and began to engage in close combat. Under the brandishing of swords and sabers, heads were tossed high into the air one after another. Limbs were chopped off and fell to the ground. Lives were quickly lost one after another. There was no absolute victor here. Even if the side that survived in the end, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Under the blades and swords, there was no distinction between identity and status. It was only about who was more agile, stronger, and luckier. The cruel, close combat on the city gate tower unfolded. Ivan watched all of this with a smile on his face. Since the army had already climbed up the city gate tower, it meant that the initial victory had begun. With the advantage in numbers, he was 100% confident that he could win this battle. It was just a matter of time. His gaze was no longer focused on the city gate tower. He already had an idea of the situation there. He was now looking at the south gate of Tove City. He was waiting for something. Amidst the expectant gazes, the southern city gate opened from the inside, as expected. Strong horses rushed out from the city, and cavalry warriors with sabers in their hands roared as they charged into the battlefield. They're finally out. Seeing the cavalry charging out of the city, Ivan was not only fearless, but he was also very happy. Then he said to the messenger beside him, "Raise the flag and order the cavalry to charge." The 20,000 White Russian cavalry that had been waiting on both sides of the army saw the flag and quickly charged from both sides. Their target was the Nuzan Cavalry Division charging out of the city. As the division commander, Yella led the charge at the very front. Behind him was a group of 40 to 50 cavalrymen. At this moment, they were using Yella as the tip of the arrow formation, charging forward at high speed. Even though they could see the White Russian cavalry approaching from afar, none of them showed a trace of fear. The cavalry charge had always been a straight line. If anyone was scared or cowardly during this process, it would only create an opportunity for the enemy to kill them. The Nuzan Cavalry Division soldiers knew this very well. Everyone shouted loudly as if they wanted to vent the anger in their hearts. The two torrents got closer and closer, and then they quickly collided. Next, it was the arrow tip against the arrow tip. A battle of life and death had begun. The arrow tip formation is indeed powerful. Ivan looked at everything that happened and said with emotion, he was a person with great learning ability. Ever since he saw the new army use this formation to defeat the Golden Horde cavalry with the same number of people, he learned this method. Now that he was using it, he was very satisfied with the results. In a short period of time, both the city walls and the city walls had entered a white-hot, tragic battle. Almost every second, someone died. At this moment, human lives seemed so ordinary and worthless. The flames of the battle continued because both sides and the cannons were no longer useful. Ivan also ordered the cannoneers to pick up swords and sabers and use them as echelons of the army. He needed to send these soldiers up when the Third Army could no longer hold on. At that time, they would be the straw that broke the camel's back, the key to victory. 2 hours passed, and the battlefield was shrouded in the stench of blood, making people want to vomit. However, no one seemed to notice. The dead were already dead, while the living were still fighting, trying to seize a chance to live from the hands of the Grim Reaper. It's about time. After the battle had lasted for nearly 4 hours, Ivan said with emotion. Then, the flag was raised high again. The moment it was waved down, the 20,000 White Russian soldiers all pressed forward. The addition of these new forces would be an important factor in tipping the scales of victory. On the city gate tower, Wu Shang raised his saber and swung it down. Another White Russian soldier was killed at his feet. Covered in blood, his killing intent caused the White Russian soldiers on the other side to involuntarily retreat. Using this time, he looked at the situation on the battlefield, and his brows furrowed. At this point, all of the new army soldiers had joined the battle. Even the logistics soldiers and medics were no exception. However, they were only temporarily undefeated. And now, Ivan had sent another 20,000 White Russian soldiers. With this force, he could foresee that the new army's defeat was inevitable. Sixth young master, I'm afraid I won't be able to see you again in the future. I only hope that you can take revenge for this general. Before I die, I will definitely kill a few more White Russian soldiers to prove that the dignity of the five-star army is inviolable. Wu Sheng roared, "Fight for the dignity of the five-star army." This shout quickly attracted the attention of the other soldiers. Immediately, the other division commanders and officers also shouted, "Fight for the dignity of the five-star army." In that instant, the morale of the five-star army soldiers, who had been suppressed, began to rise, forcing the White Russian soldiers, who had a certain advantage, to retreat. However, as more White Russian reinforcements arrived, this momentum was finally suppressed and pushed back. Not only that, but with the addition of the 20,000 White Russian soldiers, the five-star army was suppressed to the point where they could not raise their heads. After more than 4 hours of bitter fighting, many of the warriors found it difficult to even lift their swords, let alone injure or kill their enemies. "Does the heavens want my third army to die?" Wu Sheng, who also felt his arms go numb, couldn't help but roar after cutting down another White Russian soldier. Following his shout, a boundless green light suddenly appeared on the east side of Toph City. Then, it quickly approached the battlefield at a speed visible to the naked eye. What is that? Wu Sheng wasn't the only one who saw this scene. Many soldiers and White Russian soldiers also saw it, but because they were too far away, many people didn't know what it was. Ivan also saw this scene, but his face was filled with confusion. He looked at General Vanya and asked, "What's that?" "A green light that can move. What is it?" "I don't know." General Vanya shook his head with a confused expression. On the city wall, Wu Sheng also didn't understand what was going on. However, 2nd Division Commander Chun Yong killed 2 White Russian soldiers and came to his side. "General, do you think that is our uniform?" "Uniform?" Wu Sheng's eyes widened when he heard this. He used to have a green uniform with the rank of senior colonel, and he looked very handsome in it. However, that was a few years ago. Ever since he entered the depths of this area, his uniform had been damaged. Without new uniforms, it became a collection and was stored away. After that, he didn't know where it ended up, and it became a memory in the depths of his heart. Now that Chun Yong reminded him, a memory that he hadn't seen for a long time instantly popped up in his mind. When he saw the green light getting closer and closer, Wu Sheng shouted excitedly, "Yes, that must be the color of our uniform. That is our reinforcements. Our reinforcements are here." As he shouted, Wu Sheng didn't forget to wave his hands and shout. His appearance quickly attracted the attention of the other soldiers. The originally low morale and weak army seemed to have been rejuvenated after hearing the commander's words. Suddenly, they were filled with energy. When they raised their swords, they found that they were no longer as weak as before. The reinforcements were here, which meant that there was hope. There was also meaning in persevering. At this moment, everyone's potential was stimulated, and they were filled with energy again like hungry men who had seen delicious food. The soldiers of the 3rd Star were like middle-aged old men who had been rejuvenated. They actually managed to push the White Russians back dozens of meters in a very short period of time, and had a 50-50 standoff on the city gate tower. On the open ground outside the city, Yellow was fighting a bloody battle with the White Russians with bloodshot eyes. In 4 hours, more than half of his cavalry division had been killed or injured. Chapter 14:16. Ivan didn't want to give up just like that. In his eyes, Wu Sheng was an outstanding general. It was a blessing to have such a person as a friend. If he was an enemy, then he had to be eliminated. Otherwise, it would always be a big problem. The war had already reached this point. If he gave up now, he really didn't know when he would be able to surround the other party again. He might as well go all out and put all his forces into it. It was just the right time to test the combat power of the so-called five-star army. He put all the 2,000 reserve troops in place, and all the cannoneers were in place. They began to adjust the direction of the cannons. They were just waiting for the green tide to enter the range to give them a good show. The green tide coming from afar was the world's first cavalry army, led by Commander Tian, they were led by 2nd Division Lu Duo and 4th Division Su Ku. In addition to the military guard regiment, there were a total of 18,000 people. 1 man and 3 horses, led by Deputy Division Commander Yi Dai, finally arrived outside Tove City at the last moment. Still far away, the chaotic scene outside the city fell into the eyes of Tian, and the generals. At the same time, with the help of binoculars, the 20 cannons of the White Russian army were also clearly seen. They had already learned from Yi Dai that the White Russian army was good at using firearms, and the caliber of the cannons in their hands was not small. It was precisely because of this that they gradually became evenly matched with the old power of the Golden Horde. Cannons, they can deal with the Mongolian cavalry, but they are still a little lacking if they want to deal with the world's first cavalry army. Tian, whose eyes revealed a look of contempt, but when he gave the order as he rode, he was very cautious. He said to Hu Helu, who was already the head of the guards, "Inform everyone that the other party has cannons. Don't let them hit them. Tell the soldiers to disperse and advance. Change the arrow formation to a 3-3 formation. These are solid cannons. They won't explode, so it's not a big deal. Also, inform 2nd Division Lu Duo to bring people to destroy the enemy's artillery position. Don't let them stand there and make people hate them." "Yes, Commander." After Hu Helu agreed, he quickly went to send the message. Not long after, the cavalrymen who were originally running in a group dispersed and ran forward in groups of 3. The change in the formation of the world's number 1 cavalry army made it difficult for the White Russian artillerymen who were adjusting the direction of the cannons. This was the first time they had seen such a scattered formation. Without a concentrated enemy, even if the cannons fired, the casualties would be limited. Moreover, each cannon shell was expensive to make. It was not worth it to waste them like this. "Fight. Don't be afraid of wasting." Ivan's expression turned ugly. He didn't expect the 5-star army to react so quickly. Especially the cavalry, they actually changed their formation while running. Not only was there no chaos, but they were also very orderly. Just based on this point, they were not any weaker than the 3rd-star army. The stronger the army, the more Ivan couldn't let them survive. No matter what, he still had the initiative on the battlefield. The 3rd-star army was about to be destroyed. As long as he blocked the reinforcements from the 5-star army, after dealing with the 3rd-star army, he wouldn't let a single person from the 5-star army escape. Pass down the order, split the cavalry into half to block the enemy's attack. Order the infantry to attack faster and finish off the 3rd-star army as soon as possible. Ivan didn't have any intention of backing down. He was even prepared to eliminate the reinforcements from the 5-star army. Although the appearance of the reinforcements was out of his expectations, there were only 10,000 of them. He didn't put them in his eyes. On the battlefield, he still had at least 50,000 soldiers. On the other hand, the new 3rd Army only had about 10,000 soldiers. Even with the addition of 20,000 reinforcements, he still had a huge advantage in terms of military strength. What was there to be afraid of? Ivan, who was determined to finish off the 3rd-star Army, didn't realize the existence of danger. He also didn't know the strength of the enemy in front of him. On the contrary, if they were on the grasslands, mentioning the #1 cavalry army in the world of the 5-star army, many opponents would be afraid before they even fought. They wouldn't be able to calmly fight to the death like this. Ivan's order was passed down, and the artillery was ready to fire. Some of the cavalry on the battlefield also adjusted their direction and went straight to Tian, whose army in the distance. Good. Seeing that there were enemy cavalry blocking the road ahead, Tian, whose face flashed with excitement. This time, after attacking the far east with Yang Chendong, he didn't have a chance to fight to his heart's content. The opponents he encountered were so weak that they couldn't withstand a single blow. He hoped that the White Russian army wouldn't disappoint him this time. On the battlefield, generals hoped that their opponents would be weaker, so that their chances of winning would be higher. It was rare for Tianhu to think like this, but it was enough to prove his confidence in the cavalry under his command. The green tide finally entered the battlefield from the northeast under the eyes of tens of thousands of people. What greeted them was 20 iron bullets. They came from afar, leaping towards the #1 cavalry army. Faced with the roar of the cannons, even the well-trained war horses of the White Russian army seemed a little restless. However, Tian, whose army didn't have any reaction. This person was rough but meticulous, and he was proficient in 3 languages. It was reassuring to leave this kind of infiltration mission to him. The commander of the White Russian division was given to Nikolaev. This person's qualifications and ability were naturally not enough, but he had a bitter background. He could unite most of the White Russians, and he was very loyal to Yang Chendong. The people of his tribe were all in the Far East regions, all city. There was no need to worry about such people rebelling, so he was given the position of acting commander. Fortunately, Ahuli surrendered. This person had been a great Khan before, and Yang Chendong also gave him the opportunity to choose his own path. After he understood the structure and glorious history of the 5-star army, he finally decided to join the army and was directly appointed as the deputy commander. He cooperated with Nikolaev to manage the White Russian division. With Ahuli's help, the military had been greatly supplemented, and Yang Chendong could be more at ease. The next step was to let the other party undergo the baptism of war. It would be much easier to obtain an elite army after a lot of tempering. Naturally, there would be losses in this process, and a lot of people would be eliminated like sand being washed away by waves. This was the cruelty of war. This was the only way to obtain elite soldiers. This was the reason why the merciful could not command an army. Inside the Bulgar city, Yang Chuanfeng's subordinates Nikolaev, Ahuli, and the others had already infiltrated the city. They either pretended to be passers-by or people who came to seek refuge. There were also people dressed in ragged clothes who pretended to be refugees. They were hiding in various parts of the city, waiting to coordinate with the main army from the inside. As the largest city in the north of the Golden Horde, not only would there be White Russian merchants here, but there would also be some people from small tribes in the nearby forests who would come here to buy things. There were also people who did not have anything to eat, and those who could not survive would come here to beg. They were all called refugees. It was because of this that the population of the city was not fixed. Perhaps one day there would be more refugees, and the city's population would increase. The Mongolian soldiers who were in charge of security here were used to this. Of course, this had a lot to do with the pride and arrogance in their hearts. No matter what, this place belonged to the Golden Horde, and no one had ever tried to attack them here. Using this loophole, no matter if it was Yang Chunfeng, Nikolaev, or Ahuli when they entered the city, they did not attract any attention. Ahuli, on the other hand, had a look of reluctance, especially when he looked at Nikolaev, who was dressed in noble clothes. He said unhappily, "Look at you, it's a waste of good clothes on you." Ahuli looked down on Nikolaev. This was a form of racial prejudice. At that time, most Mongolians looked down on the White Russians. After all, they had suppressed them for more than 200 years. But how could Nikolaev look up to Ahuli? Hearing these complaints, Nikolaev snorted and said, "I am now the acting commander, and you are only the deputy commander. According to the rank, I am higher than you, and I have to listen to the commander's orders. Don't you know that?" Humph. This time, Ahuli did not say anything. He just snorted to show his dissatisfaction. He was willing to join the 5-star army, not because of Nikolaev. He really saw many Mongolian brothers in the 5-star army, and he heard from them that many Mongolians were living better and better under King Wunan of Daimyong. As mentioned before, Ahuli was a Mongolian Khan with his own ideas. He was a leader who wanted to let the people under his rule live a better life. To achieve this goal, he had made a lot of efforts and made a lot of concessions. For example, in the original Great Crow City, there were many White Russians there, but they had never seen him bully anyone. This was proof. He had ideas and made efforts, but the effect was not good. Later, he thought about it, and it was because he was not big enough. Now, Yang Chendong was here. He had more ideas than him, and he did things better. More importantly, he was strong enough. Not only did he have a vast territory, but he was also very rich. Ahuli, who knew all this, did not mind hitching a ride. His request was very simple. He wanted the Mongolians to live a stable life and not have to worry about food. For this goal, he almost lost his life. Now, he was just one of Yang Chendong's subordinates. What was so unacceptable about it? Ahuli surrendered to Yang Chendong, not Nikolaev, especially when he found that Nikolaev had a deep prejudice against the Mongolians. He would often talk back to him. He was venting his dissatisfaction, and also reminding Nikolaev not to be prejudiced against the Mongolians. After being a Khan for so many years, he knew when to stop. This time, after reminding Nikolaev, he did not say anything. Instead, he stared at the Mongolian general's residence across the street. He had already asked around. This was the residence of the Bulgar general. If he could control this place as soon as he made a move, then everything would be much easier. After noticing Ahuli's gaze, Nikolaev's expression became much more serious. "I say, Vice Division Commander, when we make a move, can you guarantee that you can control this place?" There was a trace of uncertainty in his voice. After all, Nikolaev was only someone from a small tribe. Although he was very brave, his experience was limited. Compared to before, when he was just a poor boy, there was too much of a difference between him and this so-called general. Where did his confidence come from? On the other hand, Ahuli's face was indifferent. He was someone who had been a Khan. What kind of situation had he not seen before? It was just a general of a city. Naturally, he would not be scared. "It's fine. When we make a move, I will be the first to rush in. You just need to bring people to guard the outside and prevent anyone from escaping." Okay. Hearing such a promise, Nikolaev nodded in relief. Although he hated the Mongols deep in his bones, if it were not for them, his tribe would not have to live such a poor life. However, he was still very confident in Ahuli's ability. Since he said so, there should not be any problems. Nikolaev, who was pretending to be a rich White Russian merchant, walked slowly on this street. From time to time, he would stop in front of some open-air stalls and ask about the price of some goods. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with it, but in fact, his heart was in a mess. This was the first time he had carried out such a mission. In the past, he only thought that when two armies fought, they would pull apart their stances and compete with courage and perseverance. However, after joining the 5-star army, he realized that even if it was a war, there was a very special way. If he used it well, he could win with fewer people and win with the weak. Like a studious student, Nikolaev studied with all his might. It was because of this spirit and his innate affinity that he was able to become friends with many White Russians. Yang Chendong appointed him as a substitute teacher. The panicked Nikolaev forced himself to calm down. However, his panicked eyes still betrayed him. From time to time, he would look at the general's residence in the distance. At the same time, he kept asking himself, why hasn't the main force of the Five-Star Army attacked yet? As if they felt his call, the street suddenly became chaotic. Many Mongol soldiers were running towards this street. Obviously, something urgent must have happened. They were here to report. Chapter 1419. Stop them! Out of instinct, Nicholas shouted to the people on both sides of the street. Then, hundreds of strong White Russian men rushed out. Unknowingly, they had sharp cavalry swords in their hands. Seeing more and more soldiers gathering around him, Nicholas couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then he thought of Ahu. He wanted to see if Ahu had already made his move. After all, he didn't have enough people with him. They wouldn't be able to hold on for long. When he turned around, he realized that the door of the great general's residence was already wide open, and he could vaguely hear the clashing sounds of swords and sabers coming from within the residence. This meant that Ahuli had already made his move. Nicholas heaved a sigh of relief. Then he turned to the White Russian soldiers who were gathering around him and said, "Hold on, don't let anyone rush into the general's mansion." As Nicholas spoke, he took a cavalry sword from one of the soldiers. Then he charged with them towards a group of 50 Mongolian soldiers. They were now warriors, and they were no longer the rootless trees from before. Recently, they had also gone through the training of battle formations. Even though they had not fully grasped it, they still managed to cut down the 50 Mongolian cavaliers with their advantage in numbers. After a quarter of an hour, only the White Russian warriors, led by Nikolai, were left standing on the street. Clean up the battlefield. Finish off those who should be dealt with. Treat the injured soldiers immediately. Thinking about the battlefield knowledge that the soldiers of the Five-Star Army had taught him, Nicholas shouted out. After that, the soldiers started to get busy again. Screams of agony sounded out again. Those were the screams of the Mongol soldiers who hadn't died yet. Some of the soldiers took out the bandages they carried with them and wrapped them around the wounds of their injured comrades. Due to the limited conditions, they could only stop the bleeding first. After the battle, there would naturally be medical personnel from the Five-Star Army to treat them. Just as these were done, the sound of horse hooves came from afar. Nicholas looked over, and his face turned ugly. It's actually the Mongolian cavalry. There are about 80 of them. Looking at his side, there were less than 70 soldiers who could still fight with light injuries. In terms of numbers, they were already inferior to the enemy, not to mention infantry against cavalry, which was a natural disadvantage. "Master, what should we do?" A few Russian officers asked Nikolai nervously. "Don't panic. Set up obstacles. Don't let the cavalry rush over so quickly." Nicholas looked to the left and right of the street, and his gaze landed on the wooden boards of the stalls. He pretended to be calm and said, "The chaos just now had already scared away the peddlers and merchants. Many people didn't even take their goods with them because they were afraid of being implicated." After receiving the order, the White Russian soldiers immediately ran to the left and right, taking out everything that could be lifted from both sides of the road and throwing them on the road to form a simple barrier. He knew that these things wouldn't last long, but he had no other choice but to do this. Right now, he could only hope that the main force of the Five-Star Army would arrive quickly. He hoped that Ahuli would be able to deal with the general's manner quickly. At the very least, it would be much safer to hide there. The Mongolian cavaliers who came from afar had already seen the obstacles on the road and also saw the corpses of their own soldiers. Their expressions changed drastically, and they became very ugly. One of the young generals said angrily, "Release the arrows. Kill these White Russian bastards." After receiving the order, the Mongolian cavalry took out the bows on their backs and started to nock the arrows. Following this, the sound of arrows piercing through the air rang out as they flew towards the White Russian soldiers. "Find a place to hide, quick!" Nicholas shouted as he hid behind a thick wooden board. Just as he finished doing that, the arrows fell and hit the wooden board, creating a series of banging sounds. As a race that grew up on horseback, the Mongolian cavalry's archery skills were very high, and there were very few who could match them. When this wave of arrows came, many of the White Russian soldiers were hit because they didn't hide well enough. There were also some who didn't find a suitable place to hide, and the arrows still pierced through their bodies. Cries of agony rang out around him, which meant that more and more White Russian soldiers had lost their lives. Hearing this, Nikoliv bit his lips. His right hand gripped the saber so tightly that it turned white. After a few rounds of arrows, the Mongolian cavalry had arrived in front of the obstacles. Following this, the cavalry at the front dismounted and started to move the objects. There were also some bleeding corpses. "Kill!" Feeling the Mongolian cavalry's aura getting closer and closer, Nicholas looked through the gap between the cover and saw that the distance between them was less than 6 meters. He knew that this was the best time to counterattack, so he shouted and led the 30 or so White Russian soldiers who weren't injured to charge out. The sudden battle cry did not cause the Mongolian soldiers to panic. On the contrary, one of them even smiled savagely and charged at Nicholas with a machete. An instant later, the two sides clashed, and the cruel battle of life and death began. As both sides fought, the Mongolian cavalry were unable to shoot their arrows. They simply dismounted and charged over. They wanted to surround Nicholas and the others and kill them all. They did not want to let a single one of them escape. When the Mongol soldiers saw that Nikoliv and his men were not afraid of death and wanted to drag them down with them, they shook their heads and retreated to open up the distance between them. At the same time, they took out their bows and arrows and prepared to shoot. Seeing the Mongol soldiers take out their bows and arrows, Nikoliv was shocked and quickly tried to find cover. However, in such a short period of time, where could he hide? Just as he thought that he was going to die, a voice suddenly shouted, "Put down your weapons immediately, otherwise your general will die in front of you." The one who shouted was Ahuli. At this moment, he had already walked out of the general's residence, and in his right hand, he was holding the Mongol general. In that short period of time, he had brought his own personal guards into the residence, and after a fierce battle, he had captured the enemy general. It was only because Bulgar City had not been in a war for many years that there were less than 50 soldiers defending the residence that Ahuli was able to deal with them in such a short period of time, saving Nikoliv's life. With their general being held hostage, the faces of the Mongol soldiers turned ugly. When they saw that the saber on their general's neck was about to be pulled at any moment, they had no choice but to put down their bows. "Many thanks." Nikoliv, who was still in shock, walked to Ahuli's side and said in an unnatural manner, "If you really want to thank me, why don't you let me be your division commander?" Ahuli suddenly made a request. Nikoliv was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted and shook his head. The acting division commander is personally appointed by Bognom of Gojozian. If you have the ability, go find Bognom of Gojozian to change your military order. "Humph, don't worry. The position of division commander will be mine sooner or later," Ahuli said without a care. The two of them were still bickering, but after what happened just now, it was obvious that their relationship had become much closer. In the words of the future, they had formed a revolutionary friendship. Huli had heard Yang Qindong's detailed explanation during the meeting. Then, he requested to stay at the general's residence to cooperate with the purchase. When the news came out, many people responded enthusiastically. They took the items that Yang Qindong wanted and exchanged them for a large amount of Han coins, then went back to the granary to buy what they needed. Ahuli's eyes widened. He saw the enthusiasm of the people, the huddling of the people, and the support of the people. This matter was fully in charge of the sacrifice. Speaking of which, he could be considered an all-rounder in both military and civilian affairs. When you get on a horse to conquer the world, when you get off a horse to rule the world, you get off a horse to rule the world. When he saw Ahuli's excited and enlightened expression, he patted his shoulder and said, "Learn, the great Bugnam of Gojosian is omnipotent." Yes, Bugnam of Gojosian is too amazing. This move not only allowed the people to quickly accept the new currency, but also received sincere praise and support from the people. Presumably, after this incident, the people no longer want the five-star army to leave this place. If someone insists on doing this, then they will become the common enemy of the people. Ahuli was indeed a smart person. From this incident, he was able to see deeper things. Hearing this, Ahuli kept nodding. Then, when he looked to the south, he was already thinking that Yang Qindong would not have a problem conquering the Golden Horde. The question was how long it would take. At first, he was still not confident that he could defeat the Golden Horde and the Rossi principalities with only a few 100,000 soldiers. But now, he knew that once he won the hearts of the people, he could get as many soldiers as he wanted. In the past, he always heard Yang Qindong say that the people were the foundation, and the people were the foundation. He also knew this principle, including the saying that water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize a boat. This was the principle of the ancient sages. But why did so many people say that only Yang Qindong could do it? Shibi had thought about this before and finally came to a conclusion. That was, other people were just saying these words. The so-called people in their eyes were the upper-class people with the right to speak, especially the landowning households and the noble families. In Yang Qindong's eyes, the people were the real people. They were the lowest class of people. They were the people who were called lowly and could be sacrificed at any time. They were the people who were looked down upon by others. It might seem that Yang Qindong was wrong, but in reality, the people at the bottom were the most common. Without them, there would be no one to farm, no one to do business, and no one to create things. The so-called high and mighty people were not far from starving and freezing to death. Chapter 14:21. Just like that, the five-star army was formed. Furthermore, the treatment of the soldiers of the five-star army was not low, and money was easy to earn. The only condition was that these women had to be healthy and they had to be able to withstand investigation. If they were spies sent by the enemy, they would be killed as soon as they were discovered. They would not be soft-hearted. In short, after Yang Qindong became the ruler of Bulgar, it was as if the sky had changed. The people had more choices, and there were more varieties and colors of food on their tables. Not long after, more and more logistics teams arrived in Bulgar. More and more goods appeared in the city, dazzling the eyes of the foreign races. Right now, they could only hate the fact that they did not have enough Chinese currency and could not buy everything they wanted. The transport team came and went in batches. When they came, they brought all kinds of supplies and rations. When they left, they brought with them all kinds of animal hides, scrap metal, and carriages of mahogany. Once these things were transported back to Crimson City, it would not take long for their value to increase by tens of times. At the very least, it would be enough to cover the expenses of the people and horses. In the past few years, potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, and other high-yield crops were discovered. What Yangtze did not lack the least was food. The granaries of the various provinces were almost filled to the brim. Now that they could use food to exchange for the rare hides of the Central Plains, it could be considered a form of income. Not to mention the furniture made of mahogany. When brought back to Crimson City, they would be in high demand. They would not worry about not being able to sell them, but they would worry about not having enough. This was equivalent to using the money from trade to fight a war. This was also a manifestation of how knowledge could change one's fate. While others were still worrying about the cost of fighting a war, Yang Qindong could already make a fortune through fighting a war. With enough money and food, he would naturally have the confidence to fight a war. With money and rewards, the soldiers would want to perform meritorious deeds. This was a kind of virtuous cycle. How could it not be powerful? Just like when Yang Qindong was winning the hearts of the people and making money in Bulgar City, the new Second Army, under the leadership of several division commanders, had already begun to expand their territory. Before anyone knew that they had arrived, they had launched continuous attacks on cities and territories. Setting out from Bulgar City, they headed south. Within 2 months, they had taken down Khat City, Kilo City, and Kazan City, all the way to Samara City. Samara was the entrance to Sarai City, the capital of the Golden Horde. In other words, once this place was conquered, the safety of the Golden Horde's capital would be directly threatened. This was something that Great Khan Mahama would never allow to happen. It was only a month ago that Mahama, who had escaped from Khat City, found out about the fall of Bulgar City. The furious Mahama couldn't understand why the 5-star Army's reinforcements had come so quickly, nor why they had the guts to cause trouble for the Golden Horde. Speaking of which, Mahama was a very domineering person. Ever since he became the 39th monarch of the Golden Horde, although the strength of the Rasi Duchy was slowly rising, he had always been in a position to suppress them. In history, when the Rasi Duchy became independent, this great Khan had already passed away many years ago. Of course, the main reason why the Rasi Duchy became independent was because the Golden Horde had begun to split, which gave them an opportunity to take advantage of. Perhaps because of his experience, Mahama was a very conceited person. He had always been the one bullying others. Since when did others have the chance to find trouble with him? After learning about this, he first reprimanded his generals for their incompetence. How could they not have received the news that such an important city like Bulgar City had been lost? At the same time, he hurriedly mobilized all the troops stationed at the border of the Rasi Duchy, from the west to the north. He wanted to take care of the 5-star Army first, and let them know who was the real king in this realm. This time, Mahama ordered his general, Gray, to lead 50,000 elite cavalrymen to Samara City and make preparations for the 5-star Army's arrival. Mahama and his generals had already analyzed the situation. As an outsider, the King Wunan of Daemyeong would not be able to fight a protracted battle with them. Just the cold winter temperature alone was not something they could handle. Therefore, the other party would definitely think of a way to end the battle quickly. Since that was the case, all they had to do was wait for the other party to arrive. The terrain outside Kazan City was wide and suitable for a cavalry charge. When the time came, he would let this outsider know that the so-called Great Ming dynasty was just a 2-legged sheep after so many years. As the descendants of Genghis Khan, the Golden Horde did not lack elite cavalrymen. They were good at war and came and went like the wind, giving people a headache. Even the Rasi Duchy, which had a certain number of firearms, had a headache. Speaking of the Rasi Duchy, after Ivan's army was defeated in Tov City, he returned to Moscow unwillingly. Not long after he entered the city, he received news that after Wu Sheng's Third Army and the 5-star Army's reinforcements met up, they left the destroyed Tov City and headed for Oxino City, occupying it. While they were recuperating, they were like a tiger watching a nail over the Rasi Duchy. As the saying goes, how could one allow others to sleep beside one's bed? The Five-Star Army's actions were seen as a threat and a provocation by the Rossi people. Not long after Ivan entered the city, he received news that his father-in-law was going to send troops to eliminate the Five-Star Army. At the very least, they were going to be chased out. With regards to his father-in-law's decision, Ivan raised both his hands in approval. Especially after fighting a battle with them and witnessing their abilities, he was even more convinced. In his eyes, the Five-Star Army was an existence that was on par with the Golden Horde. In the main hall, when Ivan arrived, all his generals were already standing there. They were listening to Vanya's report on the Battle of Tove City. Vanya knew the importance of this matter, so he did not exaggerate or exaggerate. Instead, he reported the entire battle truthfully. At the end of his report, he even said, "I don't think there was anything wrong with our command in this battle. I can only say that the Five-Star Army's cavalry was too strong." The Five-Star Army's ability was even stronger than the elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. They were not even afraid of the rumbling of cannons. They were a terrifying opponent, stronger than the cavalry of the Golden Horde. After these words were spoken, many people in the imperial court chuckled. It was no wonder that they thought so. The Golden Horde was one of the purest descendants of the Mongol army. Many of their cavalry started practicing archery when they first learned how to walk. Who could possibly be their opponent? In the face of such mocking laughter, Vanya did not respond. On the contrary, he maintained his silence. This was his way of protecting himself. The reason why he was not a direct descendant of the Grand Duke of Blindness, but still had his own position in the court, and others could not do anything to him, was because of this caution and carefulness. After all, he had already spoken the truth. As for whether they believed it or not, it had nothing to do with him. Seeing that Vanya did not respond, Ivan, who had just arrived, was not happy. His face darkened as he said, "Everyone, there is nothing funny about this. The strength of the Five-Star Army's cavalry will only be beyond your imagination." Ha ha ha. It would have been better if Ivan did not speak. His words caused even more laughter. What's going on? The smart Ivan sensed that something was wrong. He also did not know that when the news of his defeat came, Tugnev of the Vyaka city said in the court that their young master would definitely exaggerate the strength of the Five-Star Army's reinforcements to reduce his own guilt. At that time, many people heard it. Now that Ivan said it like this, wasn't it a confirmation of his words? Everyone recalled Tugnev's words. No wonder they laughed so loudly. The blind Grand Duke was also present that day. He also heard what Ivan said. When he saw his son, Ivan jump out. His expression was not good. "Ivan, it's good that you're back. This battle has been hard on you. Go back and have a good rest." This was telling him that he would not be needed in the upcoming battle against the Five-Star Army. How could Ivan be willing to let this go? He immediately wanted to refute loudly, "Father-in-law, your son, enough, this is an order, not a discussion." The blind Grand Duke displayed the dignity that a person in his position should have. Then he ignored Ivan and asked the ministers, "Oxino City is our territory. Our citizens are there. We must take it back. Who is willing to lead troops to complete this extermination mission?" Tugnev, who had long wanted to show off his skills, was waiting for these words. He immediately stepped out and said, "This general is willing." Speaking of which, Oxino City was actually one of Tugnev's areas of influence. If there was trouble there, as the true master, he definitely could not stand by and do nothing. The court meeting ended. Ivan was left behind to meet with his father alone. When there was no one else around, Ivan looked at his father with an unconvinced expression. He believed that his wise father-in-law would definitely give him a reason. Are you unconvinced? Although his vision was limited, especially in his left eye, The Grand Duke of Blindness could still sense Ivan's dissatisfaction. Ifan didn't hold back. He was indeed very emotional. "Father-in-law, what your son said is true. This 5-star army cavalry is very strong. If we don't pay attention to them, our army will definitely be at a disadvantage." "Father-in-law believes what you said." Before Ivan could continue, the blind Grand Duke had already concluded. This time, Ivan was at a loss for what to do. Fortunately, the blind Grand Duke continued speaking. "Since you are so sure, what is there to worry about? Some people will definitely hit a nail on the head. Some people will definitely look down on their opponents. Since that is the case, why not let them suffer some losses? Whether it is the 5-star army's defeat or Tugnev's defeat, it is not a bad thing for our duchy, is it not?" Chapter 14:22. At this moment, Ivan suddenly realized that his father-in-law wanted to use the 5-star army to wear down Turgenev's strength. "Sai, you should know that your father-in-law has been painstakingly managing the Rossi principalities all these years, but not everyone supports our actions. For example, Maxim, Turgenev, and Vanya are the representatives. They have their own territories, their own forces, and even their own armies. They also have a group of nobles who are dissatisfied with us supporting them. Unless there is a legitimate reason, we can't do anything to them. If that's the case, why don't we let them fight the 5-star army? Just as you said, the opponent is very strong. Let them fight it out among themselves. When the time comes, whoever wins or loses will be beneficial to us." This was the Duke's plan. Ivan finally understood and was in a good mood. "Father-in-law, I was wrong." Seeing that his son understood his father's decision so quickly, the blind Duke was also very happy. But then he asked, worriedly, "Is the 5-star army's cavalry really that strong? Turgenev won't defeat them, right?" "Absolutely not. If we are cautious, we might be able to use a large number of cannons and double the number of soldiers, but with Turgenev's arrogance, we will definitely lose," Ivan said with an incomparably resolute tone. As for Turgenev, after receiving the military order in the court, he returned to his residence in high spirits and began to mobilize his troops. He didn't believe Ivan's words. As for Vanya, although he was also on their side, he had always been timid and cautious. His words were also not trustworthy. This time, he wanted to teach the 5-star army a lesson and let them know who was the real strong on the battlefield. He wasn't the only one who thought so. The nobles who supported Turgenev also had the same opinion. Although they didn't have much contact with the Han army, they had fought with the Golden Horde for more than 200 years. From their words, it was clear who was stronger between the White Russians and the Han army. The Han people were called two-legged sheep by the Golden Horde. According to them, when faced with the attack of the Mongol cavalry, the Han people either fled or surrendered. They didn't even have the courage to resist. In comparison, the White Russians were much more courageous. Didn't this prove that they were stronger than the Han army? With the support of the nobles, provisions were naturally no longer a problem. Turgenev took his own 80,000 soldiers and the 20,000 soldiers he got from the Grand Duke of the Blind, a total of 100,000 people, 100 cannons, and 10,000 muskets to the north. In Kazan City, Yang Chendong arrived at the city under the protection of the Black Cavalry. Behind him, not only had Bulgar been liberated, and a large amount of trade had begun. Even Khat City and Kilo City, which had been taken down, had also begun to reform. With sufficient raw materials, all kinds of experiments took a big step forward, and the success rate began to increase. After ruling Crimson City for more than a decade, Yang Chendong had invested a huge sum of money into it. Now that he was finally reaping the rewards, Yang Chendong could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. The emergence of all kinds of advanced products meant that Yang Xie had taken a key step from light industry to heavy industry. The world was still dominated by cold weapons, and firearms were just in a budding state. Yang Xie's various scientific research results were undoubtedly the most advanced among them. What was there to be afraid of? Just like the field artillery, it was named by Yang Qindong, but it first appeared in history in 1897. A French artillery research team formed by General Douiville, Colonel de Boer, and Captain Romeo invented the 75mm field artillery. This was the world's first modern cannon in history. The 75mm field artillery was developed according to the patent of the German Hausen. It used the long recoil principle, but Germany refused to use long recoil cannons. This kind of field artillery had a powerful power. The 75mm cannon was the first field artillery that completely solved the recoil problem. The cannon body could be slid on a cradle through a guide wheel. The cradle was mounted on the cannon frame, and the cannon frame was connected to the piston rod in the cylinder. When the cannon was recoiled, the piston would compress the hydraulic oil, and a portion of the hydraulic oil would enter the chamber through a small valve to compress the air. When the cannon reached the end of the recoil, the compressed air would return to its original position. This was the main reason why the 75mm field artillery was so good. Now, Yang Qindong was the first to have it. This was the first time, other than Daikra, that a large cannon had been successfully created. Compared to Daikra's cannon, which required all kinds of excuses to be taken out, the appearance of the field artillery was undoubtedly a very important step forward. Although this type of cannon could only fire iron bullets, it was created through his own hard work. It was also a big step forward. Send a message to the Qiqian City Munitions Factory to continue to develop explosive bullets based on the original iron bullets. Send a message to City Lord Yu Qian to coordinate with the relevant departments and find a way to move a portion of the munitions factory to the city and build it nearby. Send a message to Tiger's Mane and Yangtze to keep a close eye on the munitions factory, especially to prevent spies from entering. If the technology is leaked, they will be killed. Also, send a message to the governor of the 3 eastern provinces, Lu Ji and General Yi Ligang. Tell them to do their best to transport the field artillery and send a batch to us as soon as possible. Yang Qindong, who gave a series of orders, wiped his fists. Chapter 14:23. Yang Qindong was doing everything he could think of to prepare for winter. He wanted to use his actions to show everyone that the winter here was not difficult. As long as they were prepared enough, it was possible to make the outside cold and the inside warm. As long as they got used to living here, the fertile black soil was a treasure. They could grow all sorts of crops with higher yields and better food. Yang Qindong did not move forward after arriving at Kazan City. This scene was seen by the Golden Horde, and they were very confused. They did not understand why the 2-legged sheep were not moving forward. Were they afraid? Or did they know that they were prepared to teach them a lesson in front of Samara and did not dare to come? All right, since you're not coming, we'll go, right? General Gray decided to give up on defending and take the initiative to attack. For this reason, he mobilized the army to find 30,000 White Russians and captured them to serve the army. Capturing slaves to charge into the army was a tradition of the Mongolian cavalry. Usually, the slaves could be used to transport military supplies for them, and in battle, they could be used to charge at the front and attract the enemy's arrows and guns. In a chaotic world, human lives were cheap. The Mongolian cavalry had never treated the White Russians as human lives. The moment he set out, the scouts reported back. This made Yang Qindong, who was prepared to defend the city, see an opportunity. He decided to change his strategy of only defending the city. Nothing in the world was difficult for those who set their minds to it. Many things had 2 sides to them. One side was good, and the other side was bad. It was just that most people could not see it. If it was only the Mongolian cavalry, Yang Chendong decided to defend with the city walls and not attack them. He would just let them attack and deplete their strength. But there were 30,000 White Russians among them. That was a completely different story. Yang Chendong's next big move was all about manpower. These 30,000 people were right in front of him. How could he not take them? Not only that, but after considering the cost, he decided to take all 50,000 Mongolian cavalry. This way, the lack of manpower would be greatly reduced. Yang Chendong summoned a group of high-ranking officers and gave them orders one by one. Xiaofeng, the commander of Cold Front's 2nd Division, who had just arrived, looked very excited. As one of the first officers to follow Yang Chendong, Xiaofeng had been holding his breath all these years. It seemed like the 6th young master trusted him and handed over the security of Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, and other provinces to him. Usually, he only needed to lead the elite Cold Front to travel between these provinces and show his head from time to time to intimidate some people. It might seem like a lot of work, but in reality, letting the most elite Cold Front do this was like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken, especially when he saw the other brotherly armies, and even many of the armies that were established later on, starting to gain merit one after another. Xiaofeng had requested for more than one battle from the army headquarters. He had even requested for a battle from Yang Chendong, but because of work reasons, he had not been transferred. 10 years passed just like that. Vietnam and the other provinces had completely stabilized. The people who moved here from other places had already gotten used to the way of life and social order here. The only thing left for Cold Front's 2nd Division to do was to train and train. Just as many aspiring soldiers were complaining endlessly, and many of them even began to request for transfer, Yang Chendong's telegram finally arrived. He still remembered that day. Xiaofeng's face was covered in tears as he knelt on the ground emotionally. After receiving Yang Chendong's orders, Cold Front's 2nd Division did not delay at all. Other than not being able to do anything on the ship, once they arrived on land, they rushed to Eastern Europe as fast as they could. They were afraid that Yang Chendong would change his mind at night, and that they would not be able to make it in time for the big battle. Just like that, 20 days in advance, Cold Front's 2nd Division reported to Yang Chendong and was fortunate enough to make it in time for the big battle. In the military meeting just now, according to Yang Chendong's military plan, Cold Front's 2nd Division was clearly the main force. Although it seemed like they were under a lot of pressure, Xiaofeng did not even frown. The harder the mission, the more it proved the ability of Cold Front's 2nd Division. The 5-star army was waiting in formation. The Mongol cavalry did not rush and appeared in Kazan City 7 days later. This did not mean that they did not want to move faster. It was just that the 30,000 White Russian slaves seemed to know their fate. They walked extremely slowly, as if they were being chased. They walked for over 200 miles in 7 days. Using these 7 days, the 5-star army had made all sorts of preparations for the big battle. Now, they were just waiting for the prey to appear so that they could reel in the net. Gray did not know about all this. He was still fantasizing about defeating these 2-legged sheep and waiting for the Khan's praise and rewards when he returned. 8 miles below Kazan City, there was a relatively wide open space that could accommodate tens of thousands of cavalry. This was the place that Gray had set up camp for the army. Although it was a little far from the city gate, he had brought all the cavalry. As long as the siege went smoothly, it would not affect the cavalry's final charge. After choosing the camp, Gray ordered the army to take the time to rest. There were infantry, cavalry, Han Chinese, Mongols, White Russians, and warriors from some unknown ethnic groups. After a rough calculation, other than the road to Kazan City in the north, there were at least 20,000 soldiers on each of the other 3 sides. In total, there were 60,000 soldiers surrounding them. Ha 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 ha. After Gray received the accurate information, he could not help but laugh out loud. 60,000 soldiers surrounding his 80,000 soldiers. What was the Han army doing? Was this a joke? Did they not know that there was no way to hide the truth? Come, send out 5,000 cavalrymen to attack the right side. I want to see who in the world can be our opponent. Gray said with a face of confidence. The generals under him immediately obeyed. A group of 5,000 Mongol cavalrymen left the main camp and started to gather on the right side of the army. The five-star army on the right side had roughly 20,000 men. They were made up of the 2 regiments of the new Second Army, the 3 battalions of the 2nd Cold Front Division, 1,200 men, and the White Russian Division, 15,000 of which were cavalry and 10,000 of which were infantry. After taking down the 4 cities of Kazan, the White Russian Division's numbers had grown. They had gone from 20,000 men to 60,000 now. Although their fighting strength had not been fully formed, and they had not been tested by war, when they all stood out, they gave off a strong aura. The one in charge of the safety of the right side was the 2nd Regiment commander of the 2nd Cold Front Division, Zhong Guangquan. When he saw the Mongol army gathering their troops and charging towards them, a smile appeared on his face. Ha! Good timing, good timing. Come, Cold Front Division soldiers, get ready to shoot. New 2nd Army cavalry, get ready to charge. White Russians, get ready to clean up the battlefield. Knowing what his mission was, Zhong Guangquan laughed out loud as he made arrangements for his troops. After which, he personally walked in front of a light machine gun and got into a shooting position. Trap was the tactic that Yang Qindong had prepared for the Mongol cavalry. Relying on the advantage of the Cold Front Division's firepower, they would surround the 80,000 soldiers until they surrendered. With that, they would be able to capture many strong laborers. This would be extremely important for Yang Qindong's plans. Chapter 1424. How would the Mongol cavalry know about this? They only knew that their enemies were a bunch of mobs. Their uniforms were not uniform. In fact, it was rare for an army to unify their uniforms. However, why were there so many different races? There were also the White Russian and Mongol soldiers. Although they were holding swords, their arms were trembling. They were clearly a bunch of untrained commoners who had never seen life and death. Could they really fight with these people? As the elite cavalry of the Golden Horde, these 5,000 Mongol cavalry had their own pride. When they found out that their opponents were so weak, they were filled with arrogance. In their eyes, they only needed one charge to break the morale of their opponents. Then, all that was left was to jump on their horses and slaughter them. One by one, the Mongolian cavalrymen laughed out loud and got on their horses. They got into formation and were ready for an assault. On the other hand, the 5-star army camp. Just as the Mongol soldiers thought, many of the sword-wielding soldiers were trembling. They were just commoners a few days ago. However, because the 5-star army gave them good treatment, they joined with the mindset of taking advantage of the situation. Some of them were so hungry that they could not take it anymore. When they found out that becoming a member of the 5-star army meant that they could eat and fill their stomachs, why would they care about anything else? The world was big, but the stomach was the biggest. As such, the recruitment process for the 5-star army was very simple. Very quickly, 60,000 people were gathered. In the following few days of military training, the soldiers of the new Second Army finally understood what it meant to be infuriated when compared to others, what it meant to be a bunch of mobs, and what it meant to be unteachable. Not to mention other things, just the fact that these new soldiers could not even tell left from right. When they walked in formation, there were all sorts of postures. There were even a few who walked with crutches. If they could not even understand the basics of walking, how could they win the battle? Because of this, Many officers had reported the situation to their superiors. In the end, when it was reported to Yang Qindong, it was like a stone sinking into the ocean. Now, these so-called unqualified soldiers had walked onto the battlefield. Looking at their performance, they were already scared out of their wits. If a fight really broke out, what would be the result? Would they be defeated before they could even meet the enemy? Although they were worried, the order was given by Yang Qindong. No matter how dissatisfied the selected instructors of the new Second Army were, they could only suppress it for now. Whether it was in Yangtze or the five-star army, Yang Qindong's position had never been shaken, and no one could question his words. The instructors who trained them did not understand. Even the acting division commander of the White Russian Army, Nikolov, and the deputy division commander, Ahuli, could not understand. In their eyes, such unqualified soldiers should not be on the battlefield. However, there were also people who understood, such as the Cold Blade warriors. As Yang Qindong's earliest trainees, many of them had learned from him. They even slept together, ate together, and trained together. They were really inseparable, and that was why the Cold Blade warriors were so strong and loyal. Even now, the selection of the Cold Blade warriors was extremely strict. Not only did they have to go through strict background checks from the previous 5 generations, but they also had to see if they could endure hardships and if they really had the strength. As for the Han Chinese standards, there was no need to mention them. This was the most basic. Of course, the treatment of the Cold Blade warriors was not something that other armies could compare to. Because of that, while Yang Qindong trusted them, the Cold Blade warriors also trusted Yang Qindong. As long as it was a decision made by the 6th young master, they would follow it wholeheartedly. Even if he asked them to climb a mountain of swords or dive into a sea of fire, they would not frown. Just like now, seeing that the Mongolian cavalry was about to attack, the other people were still nervous. Even the White Russian recruits were not confident, but these cold vanguard warriors did not even think about this problem. Their thoughts were very simple, and that was to destroy the enemy, hurt them so that they would tremble when they heard their names and lose their will to fight. On the battlefield, the 5,000 Mongol cavalry who were ready finally moved. Facing the encirclement formed by the 5-star soldiers 5 li away, they launched an assault. A total of 5,000 cavalrymen formed a fan shape as they charged forward in a long snake formation. Their shouts and cries rang out incessantly. The Mongol cavalry loved to shout. When charging, it was as if they did not shout, they would not be able to show off their strength. Often, such shouts and shouts could scare the enemy and cause their morale to drop by 30%. White Russian soldiers, take out your bows and get ready. One of the new 2nd Army's commanders yelled, following which the 8,000 White Russian archers raised their weapons and began to knock their arrows. Speaking of which, these archers were not up to standard. They had only trained for less than 7 days. Although some of them had come into contact with things when they were young, there were only a few of them. Most of them could only shoot arrows. As for hitting the target, that was not a joke. Although the number of 8,000 soldiers was not small, no one knew how much of a threat and lethality they could pose. Just when everyone was looking at this scene, worriedly Nicholas and Ari, who were standing on the top floor of Kazan City, were looking at these recruits with a pair of binoculars. Suddenly, many of the recruits released their arrows without listening to orders. Moreover, the distance of the arrows was very close. Some of them simply threw the arrows 5 or 6 meters away. Puffed. Beta Persei, who was looking at this scene through his binoculars, could not hold his breath and spat it out. Then he felt that this was not good, so he quickly lowered his head and suppressed his laughter. How was this the performance of an army? Nikolov and Ahuli lowered their heads, wishing that there was a hole in the ground for them to crawl into. These were their soldiers. Although they were not personally trained by them, this kind of performance still made them feel ashamed. On the city tower, many people who saw this scene could not help but laugh, including Yang Chendong. However, he was not mocking them. He just felt amused. Then, when everyone was laughing, he said, "There will be a first time for everyone, but this kind of thing will not happen again in the future." Naturally, no one doubted Yang Chendong's words, but it did not stop some people from thinking otherwise. Many people even thought that after this battle, these recruits would probably die, so there was no need to talk about the future. In this way, the sixth young master was right. They did not know that the reason Yang Chendong said this was because of his confidence in the soldiers of the Cold Front Army. And after these White Russian recruits experienced such a humiliating scene, they would definitely work hard and continuously improve their abilities after experiencing a bloody and fiery battle. This way, after training hard, they wouldn't have such a useless performance. It was unknown if everyone understood Yang Chendong's thoughts, but now, everyone's eyes were on the battlefield. They watched as the Mongolian cavalry got closer and closer to the five-star army on the right. They were less than a mile away. At this distance, many of the Mongolian cavalry laughed. If the five-star army did not move, they would not have the chance to move. Many of the Cold Front Army laughed. At this distance, it was too late for their opponents to escape. Next, it was time for them to perform. Commander Zhong Guangquan had been a little impatient for a long time, and his eyes became brighter. His right index finger had already touched the trigger, and he fired. At the same time he touched the trigger, a bullet shot out from the muzzle, and it went straight for a young Mongolian cavalier who was dressed in armor. Following the sound of the gunshot, the young general, who had his eyes wide open with excitement on his face, felt a pain in his chest. It was as if his entire body was fixed in place. Following that, he lost consciousness. His entire body was powerless as he fell from the horse. The sound of gunfire was an order. The regiment commander took the lead and fired the first shot. The 3 battalions, a total of 1,200 soldiers, did not hold back. They raised their guns and fired in unison. Originally, they were all aiming at their targets. Now, they were happily harvesting lives, displaying their powerful side. The Cold Front Army had the 95 style in their hands, so they could fire in bursts or in bursts. 1,200 people against 5,000 people. It seemed like there was a huge difference in numbers, but in reality, it was just 1 against 4. This was not a big deal, compared to the 2,000 black cavalry taking care of the 100,000 Ming Liaodong Iron Cavalry. This paled in comparison. Gunshots rang out, and, according to the commander's rules, a soldier could only fire 5 shots. No matter what the result was, they could not fire anymore. The meat that they ate, they had to leave the soup for their brothers, right? With each person firing 5 shots, that was 6,000 bullets. It was inevitable that some of them would miss, and some of them would be hit by 2 bullets. After the gunshots, not all of the Mongol cavalry were wiped out. At the very least, there were less than 1,000 Mongol cavalry standing there. However, they were no longer charging forward. Instead, they were either standing there in a daze or turning their horses around to escape. After 10 years of training, not everyone in the Cold Front Army was a sharpshooter, but there were many who could hit the 48th circle with 5 bullets. Since these enemies had fearlessly charged right in front of them, there was no way they would be courteous to them. With each person firing 5 bullets, the results obtained were indeed not bad. More importantly, after this round of shooting, it also shattered the confidence of the Mongolian cavaliers to charge forward, causing them to feel fear as if they had met the devil, and they lost their will to fight. New Second Army, charge forward to eliminate the enemy. White Russian Division, charge forward to clean up the battlefield. Be quick. The Cold Front Army will be in charge of keeping watch. Captain Zhong Guangquan also only fired 5 bullets. Although he was holding a light machine gun, it was just a precaution. Now that he saw that the opponent was not going to be easy, he would not casually waste bullets and take the lead to break the rules. Chapter 1425. The 4,000 cavalrymen of the new Second Army, who had been waiting impatiently for a long time, dashed out like arrows, leaving the bowstring after receiving the military order. Following closely behind were 15,000 White Russian recruits. Although they didn't have much combat experience and their military qualities weren't up to par, they were still capable of cleaning up the battlefield. Even so, when many of the recruits arrived at the battlefield and saw the blood flowing like a river and broken limbs all over the ground, many of them couldn't help but vomit. This was normal, and no one would laugh at them. Elite veteran soldiers weren't originally so iron-blooded. They were all tempered through battle after battle. In the middle of the Mongolian army, Gray saw this scene with his own eyes, and a flash of astonishment appeared in his eyes. It wasn't that he hadn't seen firearms before. His old opponent, the White Russian army, had them. Their Khan also had a small number of firearms, but in terms of power, they were far inferior to the firearms in the hands of the 5-star army. Not only could the 5-star army's firearms fire faster, their accuracy was also higher than the firearms he had seen before. Most importantly, they could fire continuously. Heavens! Where did they get these firearms from? They were so powerful. The cavalryman's charge was just seeking death. How could they win? At this moment, panic appeared in his heart, and he was no longer as confident and conceited as he was before. After being frightened by the powerful firepower and might of the 95 style, Gray didn't immediately order his men to rescue the survivors. When the battlefield was almost completely cleaned up, he suddenly thought of something. However, at this moment, the 1,000 cavalrymen who had luckily escaped the clutches of the musketeers were being surrounded by the cavalrymen of the new Second Army. Friction, and continuous friction. Their courage was broken. After losing their courage, the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen were like birds startled by the twang of a bow. They were completely surrounded, and if they were killed, if they were captured, attack the left side, attack the left side. The firepower of the 5-star army on the right side had frightened him. Gray had no choice but to give up on the idea of attacking from that side. He wanted to see the situation on the left side. If he could, he would rush out from there. Now, he was not thinking about how to take Kazan, but how to leave this place and inform the Khan of the fact that the 5-star army had powerful guns. Another 5,000 Mongolian cavaliers came from the left, and the 3rd commander of 2nd Cold Vanguard Division, Chu Luo, laughed loudly. Good timing, good timing. It's time for our 3rd Regiment to show our might. Come on, listen to my orders and prepare to fire. Lung Feng's soldiers from the 3rd Regiment and 3 battalions were eager to give it a try. Even the new 2nd Army and White Russian cavalry beside them were no longer panicking. They focused their attention on Lung Feng, who was holding onto his musket. They wanted to see another miracle. Baba, 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 Baba. The gunshots rang out just as everyone expected. Before the 5,000 Mongolian cavaliers could reach the 5-star army, most of them were killed. Then, countless cavaliers rushed out to kill the survivors and clean up the battlefield. Charge and tangle with the enemy cavaliers. They won't be our match. With the lesson just now, Gray did not hesitate this time. Instead, he immediately sent out 2,000 cavaliers. He wanted to think of a way for them to tangle with the 5-star army. This way, the enemy would not use their guns out of fear, and the advantage would fall into his hands. With a single order, the 2,000 elite Mongolian cavaliers charged forward. Although they were intimidated by the powerful guns of the five-star army. They had to charge forward, since their general had given the order. Great, more people are coming to die. Everyone, 2 bullets. Once we're done, we'll call it a day. The third commander, Chu Luo, laughed loudly to release his joyful mood. Then, he took the lead and fired a bullet. The bullets seemed to have eyes as they charged towards the incoming Mongolian cavalry. There were only 2,000 of them, and they were only left with less than 300 in a short period of time. By the time they arrived in front of the new Second Army, they were no longer able to do anything. How did this happen? How did this happen? Gray's expression became increasingly ugly when he saw the reinforcements he had sent out being buried so quickly. It was as if he had seen a ghost. While his expression changed, he turned around to look behind him. In just 2 short attacks, they had lost 12,000 cavaliers. Not a single one of the cavaliers who had charged out had returned alive. This was the first time he had seen such a loss after becoming a general. In the past, when he had fought with the White Russian army, he had suffered some losses. However, if he wanted to retreat, he could do so. How was it like facing the five-star army, where none of the cavaliers he had sent out had returned? It wasn't just Gray. The 3,000-plus cavaliers under him, as well as the 30,000 White Russian slaves, all revealed terrified expressions. This time, they had thought that this was an easy mission to complete, and that it was time for them to show off the might of the Mongolian cavaliers. However, who would have thought that this was simply hell? In front of the five-star army, they were just like loathsome mosquitoes that could be stepped on and slaughtered at will. No one had any ideas. They could only look at Gray, hoping that he would have a way to turn the situation around. However, Gray had long since run out of ideas. He had only taken a glance behind him and did not give the order to break out of the encirclement. From his point of view, he still had a chance. There was no need for him to make a decision to fight to the death. He could continue waiting. Once there was no news of him from the Khan for a long time, he would definitely send reinforcements. When that happened, there would be an opportunity for him to coordinate with the Mongolian cavaliers. With hope in his heart, Gray decided to pull back his troops and focus on defense. His army could no longer take a beating. If not, their morale would be completely destroyed. While the five-star army on the left, rear, and right were waiting for their opponents to choose to attack, the Mongolian cavaliers had actually stopped in their tracks. Furthermore, they quickly took out the barricades that they had put away in the morning and assumed a stance that they were going to defend to the death. This infuriated the 3 armies surrounding them. What are they doing? They've only charged out twice, and they're already afraid. What a bunch of cowards. They're cowards. How can such people claim to be the strongest Mongolian cavaliers in the world? What a joke. Angry shouts followed, and there were even people shouting in dissatisfaction. When the shouts reached the Mongolian camp, the faces of Gray and many of the young generals turned pale. They were ashamed and embarrassed. Not long ago, they had accused the Hans of being two-legged sheep, saying that they only knew how to hide within the city walls and not dare to come out to fight. However, today, everything had changed. They had become cowards, cowards who did not dare to come out to fight. However, they were still inferior to the Hans. At the very least, the Hans had sturdy city walls, while they only had a simple camp made up of wooden fences. Could such a camp block the enemy's charge? Order the archers to prepare for a counterattack. Also, place the 30,000 White Russian slaves at the outermost perimeter. Gray said worriedly. He wanted to use the White Russians as human shields to protect their safety, regardless of whether the White Russians were willing or not. Under the threat of the 30,000 Mongolian cavaliers, they could only do as they were told. This scene was seen by the surrounding White Russian soldiers, causing many of them to reveal expressions of anger. Although these people were not their friends, from a certain point of view, they had a common ancestor. In fact, if they were a few generations older, they might even be of the same race. Seeing their fellow countrymen being humiliated and threatened, some of the hot-blooded people actually took the initiative to ask for battle. They wanted to charge up and kill the Mongolian cavaliers to save the people with the same skin as them. Chapter 1426. The reinforcements in Gray's mind were indeed on their way here. However, not long after they left Samara City, they were surrounded by the commander of the new Second Army, Shibi, who had suddenly appeared along a tributary of the Volga River. The 1st Regiment commander of the 2nd Cold Front Division, Chaiji, was also with him. The sound of a gun was exchanged for 10,000 taels of gold. In just an hour, 5,000 reinforcements and 100 carriages of rations were exchanged for the 5th Star Army's contribution. Reporting to the commander, "We have killed more than 870 enemies and captured the rest. Not a single one escaped. Please report." The commander of the guards, Su Liang, reported the results of the battle in a loud voice. "Quickly clean up the battlefield. Do not leave behind any traces of battle." Shibi returned the salute and gave the order. Then he smiled at Chai Ji and asked, "Commander Chai, why do you look so down?" "Yes, these opponents are too weak. It's not fun to fight them." Chai Ji sighed and pretended to be a fool. At this moment, he looked as if he had taken advantage of the situation and was pretending to be innocent. After listening to him, Shibei did not expose him. Instead, he pretended to be deep in thought and said, "Since that's the case, the next time the Mongolian army sends reinforcements, let us, the new Second Army, deal with them. If there are people who try to escape, you can attack them." Chai Ji jumped up like a rabbit whose tail had been stepped on. "How is that possible?" The 6th young master said that the Cold Front Division should be the main force in the battle. Only then can we eliminate the enemy faster and more thoroughly. How can we, his subordinates, change the order? "Oh, then we will have to trouble Commander Chai." Shibi smiled bitterly. Yang Chendong's order was like this, but it was just an excuse. In short, the Cold Front Division should be the first to fight. If there were any problems, the new Second Army could only get the leftovers. But in the face of the tyrannical advantage of firearms, how could there be any problems? Just as Shibi and Chai Ji were lamenting that the enemy was too weak and that the battle was not challenging at all. Further south, the Reconnaissance Division commander Su Yunsheng was leading a small group of cavalry on a patrol. Su Yunsheng entered the Golden Horde with the 2nd Division of the Cold Front and the transport team. After coming here, Yang Chendong gave him a new order, which was to go to the front lines and completely seal off the battle below Kazan. In other words, not a single Mongolian scout was allowed to enter the battlefield. This would create a sense of mystery and prevent the Golden Horde from acting rashly because they did not know what was going on. In Yang Chendong's eyes, the final battle would take place next year. What he needed to do this year was to stabilize the rear. At this moment, it was not an exaggeration to say that he had run out of food and ammunition. In just 3 days, the morale of the army had fallen to the extreme. Many soldiers were unwilling to get up in order to reduce the consumption of energy. They did not look like soldiers and did not have the morale to fight. This made him very angry. He was also very helpless. Should he charge? The 2 failures had already told him that the Han people were very powerful. Charging was just suicide. Should he retreat? Their path of retreat was blocked. Without the cooperation of reinforcements, how could they charge out? Should he surrender? As a general of the Golden Horde, his dignity did not allow him to do so. At this moment, he did not know what to do. The most terrible thing in a war was to wander around without a purpose. That would only waste time and create opportunities for the enemy to destroy you. After all, Gray was one of the top generals in the Golden Horde. He would never have thought of making such a low-level mistake, but he was making it now. Without a goal in mind, waiting to die was the only thing Gray could do at this moment, as well as the only thing he could do. He looked around and found that the Han people's camp had not changed at all. In the past 3 days, there had not been a single opening. If he continued to wait, there might not be any good opportunities. Since he could not wait for the enemy to make a mistake, he could only take the initiative to attack. Without anyone to cooperate with, he could only rely on himself to kill his way out. No matter what, he was the second-ranked general of the Golden Horde. He had a resolute heart. Gray's target was the southeast side behind him. He had already observed that there were only about 20,000 Han people there. He still had 30,000 elite cavalry and 30,000 White Russian slaves. When the time came, he would leave 20,000 White Russian slaves to guard his back while the 10,000 White Russian slaves charged forward. Once they got close to the Han army, he would lead the cavalry to break through the encirclement. He did not ask for victory in this battle, nor did he ask for the number of enemies he could kill. As long as he could charge out, it would be a victory. With such low requirements, there should be a chance for him to do it. Men, distribute the rations and prepare for battle. Gray was very smart. He used the Han people's military tactics to fight to survive. Without enough rations, everyone could not continue to wait. The only path left was to fight with their lives on the line. Kazan City, every move of the Mongolian army, would be reported to Yang Qindong at any time. When he heard that the other side had started to distribute the rations, Yang Qindong, who was writing a development plan with his head lowered, slowly raised his head. His eyes flashed with a light of wisdom. Are they preparing for a counterattack? It's been 3 days. They should be unable to hold themselves back. Gray did not know that his every move had been seen clearly by Yang Qindong. Even if he knew, he would not care. He had summoned several captains and kiliarchs of the army and was cheering them on. Everyone, the might of the 5-star army's firearms is extremely strong. They are many times stronger than the White Russian army. This kind of enemy is not something we can deal with. Therefore, I have decided to break out of the encirclement. As long as we can escape, it will be a great victory. We can then report the situation of the 5-star army to the Khan. In the future, we should not be impulsive and take the initiative to find trouble. Defending our own city is the best choice. After all, it has been proven that the other side only has firearms and no cannons. This is the only thing we can rejoice about. Bang, bang, it seemed to be a slap in the face. Just as Gray finished speaking, the roar of the cannons rang out, causing the faces of the generals present to turn ugly. There was no need to talk about Gray. His eyes were so red that they could be compared to a monkey's, but at this moment, he finally understood that it was not that the other side did not have cannons. It was just that the time was not right. Just by listening to the sound of the cannons, he knew that the other side's cannons were as powerful as their firearms. The 100 millimeters mortar started to wreak havoc in the Mongol cavalry camp, under the command of the 2nd Division Artillery Battalion Commander Lin Luan. A total of 20 cannons landed one after another beside the camp. When the first cannonball landed, it caused a huge wave that was enough to blow over the camp and cause the neighs of war horses to ring out continuously. Although it was only a total of 60 cannonballs, it was enough to cause a huge wave, causing Gray, who was preparing to break out of the encirclement, to be completely defeated. What's going on? Where did the cannons come from? Where did the cannons come from? Gray walked out of the large tent and grabbed a Mongol soldier who was running around in panic. It's the cannons from Kazan City. That soldier originally wanted to break free from his restraints. He did not want to die and only wanted to find a safe place to hide. However, when he saw that the person who stopped him was General Gray, he had no choice but to stand on the spot and answer. "The cannons from the city? That's impossible." After hearing this answer, Gray shook his head continuously. That was a distance of 8 li. He did not believe that any cannons could reach that far. Furthermore, the cannons were not solid shells, but explosive shells. All of this had already exceeded his understanding. As the sky gradually darkened, Gray, who was still persevering, did not give the order to surrender. The soldiers below could only endure, hugging their weapons and curling up together. Since they had already confirmed that there was no dinner, they could only move less to reduce their energy consumption. However, he neglected one thing, and that was the hearts of the soldiers. During the day, due to the strict supervision, as well as the fact that Gray had sent out his personal guards to patrol the area, no one dared to escape in front of them. However, it was different when it was dark. The limited vision caused many gaps to appear in the barracks. This gave some soldiers who were ready to surrender a chance to survive. The sky had just turned dark, and a team of 100 people had already surrendered. When the news reached Gray's ears, he remained silent. After a while, he replied, "Got it." With the situation as such, it wasn't something that could be changed by human strength. In the end, Gray was still soft-hearted. He didn't want to see all of his soldiers die here like him. Why not be merciful before they die and give them a chance to live? The general's disregard for everything sped up the process of the Mongol army surrendering. At the start, it was only 100 men surrendering under the threat of the powerful guns and cannons. It was 1,000 men surrendering one by one. No one even bothered to look after the white Russian slaves. In the end, during the chaos, the Mongol soldiers and white Russian slaves surrendered to the 5-star army. Division Commander Xiao Feng's mission was to guard the rear of the Mongol cavalry. According to the plan, this was likely to be the place where the battle was the most intense. After all, once they discovered that the road ahead was blocked, the Mongol army that wanted to escape would definitely charge towards this place. The plan couldn't keep up with the changes. The Mongol army, which still had over 50,000 soldiers, had actually surrendered just like that. This caused all of Xiao Feng's preparations to be useless. He could only lead his soldiers to capture captives. For the entire night, no one was able to find a chance to rest. When the sun rose, the entire Mongol camp was already empty. When General Gray walked out of his tent, he saw less than 2,000 soldiers. It wasn't that these people didn't want to escape, but that they had killed too many people. They were afraid that even if they surrendered, they wouldn't be able to survive. Okay, looking at the remaining 2,000 cavalrymen, Gray started to relax. He could finally go all out without any misgivings. Everyone, centaurs. Outside the camp, Division Commander Xiao Feng didn't reveal any signs of exhaustion after a night of hard work. On the contrary, he was extremely excited. This was the outcome he didn't want to see the most. He wanted to die like a brave warrior, but these Han people didn't give him such a chance. As Gray shouted, 2 sturdy horses appeared in front of him. One of them was holding a sharp divine saber, while the other was holding a rather heavy mace. They blocked Gray's path of advance, one on the left and one on the right. The people who had come were Beta Persei and Ahuli. The former had only been allowed to enter the battlefield after continuously begging Yang Qindong. As for Ahuli, Yang Qindong cherished talent. He had already found out from the captives that everyone had surrendered because Gray had tacitly agreed to it. This was enough to prove that Gray was still kind. He liked such people very much and was willing to recruit them. Ahuli's mission was to persuade Gray to work for him. When Gray saw the two warriors, he couldn't help but stop his horse. He wanted to see what the other party wanted to say to him. "You must be General Gray. My young master already knows what you've done. He admires you very much. Now, I'll give you a chance. Dismount and surrender. Not only will you not die, but if you perform well enough, you can also lead soldiers and become a general again. Of course, this so-called performance means that you have to defeat me. Do you dare?" Beta Persei stretched out his left hand and gently stroked the cavalry sword in his hand. An eager expression appeared on his face. He didn't ask if he could, but if he dared. This was originally a verbal trap. However, Gray was clearly infuriated by Yang Er's words. He had lost, but he had lost to the powerful guns and cannons, not because he was afraid of the two-legged Han people. Seeing that Beta Persei had challenged him on behalf of the Han people, Gray, who had long been suppressing his anger and wanted to prove himself, immediately shouted back, "Who's afraid is a coward. Just don't let others help you with guns." Beta Persei was afraid that Gray wouldn't agree. As long as he was given a chance to fight, why would he need the help of others? Did he really think that he was playing around with Yang Qindong these days? With a grandmaster by his side, his improvement was obvious. Although he could often fight with the black cavalry, it was not a life-and-death battle, so he couldn't completely let go. Now that the opportunity had appeared, he laughed and said, "Okay, it'll be a one-on-one fight between the two of us. Ahuli, you don't have to help." As long as what he said was the truth, she would be able to create a drama based on him. If that was the case, wouldn't he be famous all over the world? Even if it was for the sake of becoming famous and becoming a hero, Beta Persei had to perform well. He brought out 120% of his spirit. When he faced Gray, there was no fear or dread in his eyes, only excitement and agitation. "Watch my blade." Borrowing the horse's momentum, he quickly rushed in front of Gray. Then, he slashed down with his blade. He used 100% of his strength in this slash. Gray didn't know about this. In his opinion, the outcome of the battle between the two of them couldn't be determined in a short period of time. This meant that he had to save his strength. At the very least, he couldn't use it all at once. Otherwise, how could he continue to play? Instinctively, he only used 60% of his strength to block this slash. He was even prepared to counterattack after blocking the attack. However, when the two sabers collided with the scimitar, he knew that he was wrong, very wrong. "Oh, my God!" Instinctively, Gray, who had let out a sigh, couldn't help but feel his right arm being pressed down. At this moment, he felt that his right arm had been injured with just one blow. What was worse was that the saber was still transmitting a huge amount of force, forcing his saber to move back bit by bit. His face was red. At this moment, Gray wanted to continue increasing his strength to turn the situation around. However, in a situation where he was already suppressed, it was very difficult to turn the situation around. Furthermore, his opponent didn't seem to be giving him the time to do so. Beta Persei was a hothead. In his eyes, there were no rules of a one-on-one fight. In his opinion, a move that could knock down his opponent was a good move. Just like what the young master always said, no matter if it was a black cat or a white cat, it was a good cat if it could catch a mouse. As for gaining the upper hand in just one round, this was somewhat out of Beta Persei's expectations. He had always heard people say how good the Mongolian cavalry was on horseback, how exquisite the Mongolian general's equestrian skills were, and how outstanding his strength was. He was even prepared for a bitter battle. However, he didn't expect to completely suppress his opponent in just one round. He felt that the strength of his opponent's arm was much weaker than he had imagined. Thus, he had to take advantage of the situation and say, "Oh, this strength isn't that great either." It would have been better if he didn't say anything. After hearing this, Gray's expression turned ugly. His face, which was originally red from holding his breath, became even redder. It was as if he was about to turn completely red. At this moment, he wanted to angrily scold his opponent for not following the rules. Why did he have to use his full strength right from the start? However, he didn't have the chance to speak at all. The two scimitars, one up and one down, were still rapidly approaching Gray's chest. No matter how hard Gray tried, it was already impossible for him to turn the situation around. In just a short while, he felt his entire right arm go numb and sore. If not for his willpower supporting him, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to hold on anymore. Beta Persei, who had the upper hand, was continuously exerting his strength. Seeing that the situation was set, he even saw that a crack had appeared on his opponent's scimitar because of the continuous attacks. He was afraid that if he continued to persevere, he wouldn't have to do anything. The strength of his scimitar would be enough to guarantee victory. Thus, he slightly restrained his strength. Then, his body slanted, and he took the opportunity to kick forward. Beta Persei was very clear in his heart that the young master wanted a living Mongolian general, not a dead one. Otherwise, why would he need to put in so much effort? A single bullet would be enough to end the battle. The kick came without any warning, causing a hint of joy to appear on Gray's face. He thought that his opponent was powerless and was about to withdraw his scimitar. Just as he was about to counterattack, a large foot appeared in front of his eyes. Then, the foot grew bigger and bigger until he felt a sudden pain in his chest. Beta Persei's strength was so great that this kick made Gray feel as if he couldn't breathe. Then, he fell from his horse, and a sharp saber was placed on his neck. Originally, they thought that it would be a fierce battle. However, who would have thought that it would end so anticlimactically? Many people didn't have the time to watch it before it ended. Gray had become a captive under the saber. There was no need for Beta Persei to say anything. The other 5-star army soldiers had already run over and tied up Gray, who had fallen to the ground. With him tied up, it also meant that the Mongolian army had suffered a great defeat. A total of 80,000 people came. After this battle, the number of captives reached 60,000. This Khagan of the Golden Horde is a little like a transport captain. After Yang Qindong finished speaking, he didn't care if anyone else understood him. He turned around and went down the city gate tower. Just yesterday, he received a telegram from the world's 1st Cavalry Army and the Cold Front's 3rd Cavalry Army. It recorded that they had defeated Turgenev of the Russian clan. Turgenev had underestimated his opponent and rashly attacked. The Cold Front's 2nd Cavalry Division had sent reinforcements and made him dizzy. Then, the world's 1st Cavalry Army took the opportunity to attack and ended the battle. Yang Qindong had already expected this result. Turgenev wasn't a direct descendant of the Russian duchy. Chapter 1429. Interest was the best teacher. When there was motivation, the enthusiasm of the soldiers increased. As the instructors, the skeleton warriors of the 5-star army felt much more relaxed. When the matter was reported to Yang Qindong, he didn't care about it anymore. He had already focused on the road construction. This place was too far away from the 5-star army's base camp. Even if it was relatively close to the 3 eastern provinces and Shecheng, it would still take 1 or 2 months to travel. Such a long transportation line made Yang Qindong worried. He couldn't watch a large number of supplies being consumed on the road. Although Yang Xie was developing fast and had enough wealth to persist, if he didn't think of a solution, it would eventually become a problem. It might become a fatal problem at any time. In order to save time on the road, Yang Qindong thought of the steam train. It had been more than 2 months since the first steam engine was built in Resin City. Many things were difficult in the beginning and difficult in the first step. As long as the first step was taken well, many things would become much easier in the future. According to the telegram, the number of steam engines in Resin City had already exceeded 5,000, and the number would increase exponentially every month. The fields involved included mining, water pumping, agriculture, textiles, construction of field cannons, and so on. Following the continuous research and development, it would also involve the power drive, such as the use of warships and the real construction of trains. Over the years, the research department of Crimson City had been working hard on the exploration. They had even created electric batteries, and they had also built electric scooters according to the ideas provided by Yang Qindong. Although they could only build 2-wheeled motorcycles and 3-wheeled motorcycles due to the limitations of their efficiency, they could still build 2. As long as they had the right ideas, it wouldn't be difficult to build electric scooters in the near future. Even so, with the steam engine, would the steam train be far away? Once there was a train, it would greatly increase the speed of the 5-Star Army's march and Yangtze's commercial and industrial development. At that time, with the fastest speed, they could achieve twice the result with half the effort. Yang Qindong was confident that this day wouldn't be too far away. What he needed to do now was to make all the necessary preparations. For example, the provinces of Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia had already begun to lay down railway tracks in preparation for the appearance and operation of trains. Even the origin city had begun to study this matter. It was said that they were preparing for the project. As their leader, Yang Qindong naturally couldn't be left behind. First, he had to build the road and lay a good foundation. This was what he was prepared to do this winter. Once there was a good foundation, the rails could be laid as soon as they were in place. Would the steam train be far away? At that time, the local specialties here could be easily transported out in the shortest time. The thought of the profits made Yang Qindong smile in his sleep. After setting the plan, Yang Qindong gave the order and began to get busy. The White Russians and Mongolian captives were the main force, while the rest were invited over with money and food. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the situation changed every day. In just the first day, these people cleared the mountains, built bridges, and built a solid foundation of 3 kilometers. Don't underestimate these 3 kilometers. Many of them were doing this for the first time and didn't know where to start. As they became more familiar with it, they could even reach 30 kilometers a day, or even longer. At this time, Yang Qindong seemed to be able to see the scene of a steam train burning coal and water roaming the land. Compared to the bustling construction scene in the east of Yangchun, the world's first cavalry army was recuperating and training in Oxino City. Not everyone was like Yang Qindong. They could create many things that were much more advanced than the modern era. Take Tian, who, for example, all he could do was train his elite troops and win battles. After meeting up with Wu Sheng's Third Army, they unexpectedly went north and occupied Oxino City in order to find a place to rest and recuperate. Wu Sheng's Third Army was basically destroyed this time, and their fighting strength was less than 20%. They would need at least half a year to recover to a certain extent. In comparison, the world's #1 cavalry army did not need to do so. They had won the battle with the White Russians almost immediately and had not suffered any losses. While Commander Tian, who was resting, he began to lead the cavalry of the First Army to the nearby areas to gather grass and grains. What Tian, who did not expect, was that although there were many White Russian villages in the surrounding area, they were simply too poor. It was to the point that many people had problems even eating. When he led the army to places, they did not encounter any resistance. Afterwards, Countless people brought their families and surrendered. In order to survive, they even took out the only food they had. In Tianhu's eyes, the amount of food they had made him not know whether to laugh or cry. Originally, he wanted to make a profit, but he did not expect that the nearby White Russians were even poorer than him. In desperation, Tian, who could only give up on robbing the people. However, what he did not expect was that he would gain the title of a benevolent and righteous army. It turned out that the bloodlines of these White Russians were not the purest. Their bloodlines were not only White Russians, but also Mongols and other white races. Because of this, the blind Duke and the other White Russians who believed themselves to be pure did not approve of them, and even began to abandon them. Only when they lacked food would they occasionally think of them and rob them. They were originally poor, and after being robbed again and again, these impure White Russians only became poorer. There were even cases of them trading children for food. But even so, they were still struggling to survive. This was also one of the reasons why when Tianhu appeared with the army, they instinctively offered up their food in order to survive. After getting used to being robbed, when they suddenly saw that the Han army did not want anything, the people were moved and became more willing. Many of them actually followed Tian, whose army, back to Oxino City. This was all because they were filled with envy when they saw that the #1 cavalry army in the world could eat steamed buns and even meat intestines. It was to the point that they were willing to risk danger to follow Tianhu's army, all for the sake of being able to eat their fill. Tian, who also had a headache about these people following him. So he quickly sent a telegram to Yang Qindong to ask for instructions on how to solve this problem. Soon, there was a reply. Yang Qindong ordered that in view of the heavy losses suffered by the Third Army, they could consider recruiting young and strong soldiers from the people on the spot. As for the other people, they could be arranged to build roads from Oxino City to Bulgar City. Later, there would be a logistics team transporting food and fodder there. Whether it was the Golden Horde or the Rossi Principalities, in Yang Qindong's eyes, the most valuable thing was people. This place was vast and sparsely populated, and people were the foundation of all things. As long as there was enough labor for him to use, whether it was mining or obtaining other information, the speed would be much faster. He had already sent a telegram to Achaemen City requesting for a few mining teams. However, the number of people was limited, and some of the basic labor needed people to do. Population was extremely important. After receiving the order, Tianhu followed the instructions in the telegram and recruited the people into the city. He assigned them jobs according to their age and also provided them with food. He also promised that if they performed well, they would be paid more, and the amount would not be too little. As long as they were willing to work hard, the money they earned would not only be able to feed their families, but also improve their quality of life. Being paid for work was a matter of course. How could they work without physical strength? Even so, the food was only 30% full, and they would not starve to death, not to mention being paid for their work. When had the people here ever heard of such a good life? Soon, more and more people were heading to Oxino City. Many people who lived far away also came in droves when they heard the news. Although they did not know whether this was true or not, it still gave them hope for survival. Although many of them had opened up some fertile land nearby to survive, every time it was time to harvest, the White Russians would come out to plunder. Often, a year's worth of hard work would be for nothing. Now that they could enter the city to work, their safety was guaranteed. As for whether they would be paid or not, they did not dare to ask for too much. At the very least, they would be provided with food. The number of people coming to seek refuge increased day by day. Tianhu and Wu Sheng were naturally overjoyed. They quickly sent out a large number of people to maintain law and order. At the same time, they formed a temporary department in charge of settling the people. For a time, The city was very lively. Some people were happy, while others were worried. When the news spread to the Rossi principalities and the White Russian nobles, they could not remain calm. These people were not pure White Russians. In their eyes, they were the lowest existences. They were targets that could be taken as they wished. They looked down on such people in their hearts and did not treat them as their own. However, if someone wanted to snatch people from them, they would not allow it. What's wrong? I can bully my people, and I can even slaughter them. But outsiders are absolutely not allowed. Otherwise, when I need food and labor in the future, where will they go to find them? If the entire country's people followed suit and asked for food and wages just to work for them, wouldn't they go bankrupt? The nobles were not willing, and the matter was quickly reported to the Grand Duke of Blindness. They begged the Grand Duke to uphold justice for them, under great pressure. The Grand Duke of Blindness had no choice but to change his previous strategy and consider sending troops to the Five-Star Army. Spies had already reported that the Five-Star Army had conquered 4 cities of the Golden Horde. Not only that, but they also fought a big battle outside Kazan City. As for the results, there was still no news. Even the scouts of the Golden Horde could not get any specific information, let alone the weaker Rossi principalities. Chapter 1430. But no matter what, it was always a good thing for these two opponents to fight. According to the Grand Duke of Blindness's strategy, what they needed to do was to watch the two tigers fight and let them suffer. Then, when they were tired of fighting, they would quickly attack and secure victory. But now what happened in Oxino City had crossed their bottom line. It was unrealistic to want to watch the battle. Summoning a group of generals and nobles, the Grand Duke of Blindness discussed the deployment of troops. In view of the previous defeat in Tove City, the request this time was to not deploy troops. If they did, they would definitely win. They had to drive the Five-Star Army out of their own territory. At the same time, they had to kill those Russian peasants who had defected to the Five-Star Army as an example to others. They had to be dealt with as a warning to others that if they wanted to defect to the Five-Star Army, they had to be prepared to be killed. In this regard, the nobles in the meeting naturally agreed. In order for the army to achieve a great victory, they took the initiative to offer a sum of money as a reward to the soldiers who had contributed to this battle. Of course, they would not give in vain. The captives of this battle would become the new slaves of these nobles. With the high reward, the generals at the meeting became more active. No one would go against the money. Immediately, several generals took the initiative to step forward and asked to lead troops to suppress the Five-Star Army. In this regard, Ivan looked on coldly from the sidelines. His eyes were filled with mockery and coldness. The existence of nobles restricted the development of the Russian Empire. These people were unscrupulous and short-sighted. Wherever there were benefits, they would be there. But when it came to offering, they would become mute and start to retreat. Moreover, these people were extremely united. Often, when they went overboard, and the father wanted to deal with one of them, the others would jump out to plead for mercy. Sometimes they would even threaten the other party. The nobles who had both power and money gave the Grand Duke of Blindness a headache. When there was a huge beast like the Golden Horde outside, even though he was dissatisfied, he had to lower his head and feign civility. Sometimes, for the benefit of the nobles, he had to give up his own gains and lose the hearts of the people. This had already begun to hinder the development of the country. If the blind Grand Duke could see those drawbacks, how could the smart Ivan not see them? However, they couldn't fall out with him yet. Otherwise, the country would be riddled with internal strife before anyone else did anything. Under Ivan's cold gaze, the various nobles participated in the meeting enthusiastically. Very quickly, It was decided that Maxim would lead 10,000 White Russian musketeers, 10,000 White Russian cavalry, 30,000 White Russian infantry, and 80,000 White Russian and Mongol slaves for a total of 130,000 soldiers. Maxim was naturally able to snatch this job because he was an important leader of the city of Novgorod in the Rossi Duchy. He was also one of the generals with the greatest authority apart from the Grand Duke of Blindness. Normally, this person could be said to be a sly old fox. He wouldn't make a move if there were no benefits. Even during the war with the Golden Horde, this person wouldn't act unless there were benefits. Many times, the blind Grand Duke had to use a negotiating tone to persuade him to make a move. This time, he seemed to have the 5-star army in his grasp. After all, according to the battle report, the 5-star army's reinforcements only had 30,000 to 40,000 cavalry. As for the previous Wusheng Third Corps, it had already been destroyed. The thing that was least needed to defend a city was cavalry. The most useless thing was also cavalry. It was just that 30,000 to 40,000 enemies weren't good at defending a city, so they were easy to deal with. Thinking that he had found an opportunity, Maxim took the initiative to ask for troops. Naturally, the nobles were very supportive. Those who had money contributed, and those who had things contributed. The matter was quickly settled. Then, like stars surrounding the moon, they accompanied Maxim out of the hall. In the end, only the blind Grand Duke and his son were left. The blind Grand Duke was very optimistic about his son. Even if the Tov City army was defeated, he still thought highly of Ivan. He even thought that it wasn't a bad thing for a young man to encounter some setbacks. On the contrary, it would be helpful for his future growth. After seeing that there was no one else in the hall, Ivan spoke. He knew why his father wanted him to stay alone, so he simply said bluntly, "Father-in-law, your son doesn't think highly of Maxim's campaign this time. The Han people aren't that easy to defeat. They are likely to hit a wall." "Oh, are our guns and cannons not enough?" The Grand Duke of Blindness asked curiously from his high seat. "This, if we push forward layer by layer, with the power of our guns and cannons, there is still a possibility of victory. But if we are too arrogant, then we will definitely fail." That's right, Turgenev's defeat is an example. Ivan hesitated for a moment, then said with a firm tone. Ivan's meaning was very clear. If he led the army in this battle, then they would win. If it was someone else, then it would be hard to say. The blind Grand Duke laughed. How could he not understand his son's meaning? Wasn't this what he wanted? Just like how Ivan saw the arrogance of the nobles, how could the blind Grand Duke not know this? Although his eyes weren't very good, he understood in his heart. If he wanted to revitalize the Russian Empire, these nobles would undoubtedly become an extremely heavy stumbling block. If he didn't kick them to the side, then problems would occur sooner or later. However, seeing a problem in many things didn't mean that it could be solved. The nobles were very united. They would only do things that would benefit them. If there were no benefits, they would pretend to be confused and stay away. Even if someone wanted to scheme against them, there was no better way. This time, the nobles recommended Maxim to take action because they saw that the Han people had more powerful cannons and wanted to take them for themselves. Moreover, the Han people had 40,000 cavalrymen. War horses had always been something that the Russian Empire needed the most. It was because of these benefits that the nobles took action. However, they forgot about Turgenev's defeat. It must be said that the nobles couldn't be blamed. It was because Turgenev cared too much about his reputation. When he returned, he didn't mention that he had escaped. He only said that the Han army's cannons were too powerful. Seeing that he was no match for them, he couldn't possibly use human lives to make up for it. This made everyone unable to see the true strength of the Han army. Back to business. Although the blind Grand Duke knew that the Han people weren't to be trifled with, he didn't stop them. He also wanted to use this opportunity to deal a heavy blow to the nobles' strength. This would play a positive role in his better governance of the Russian Empire. Once Maxim's army was defeated, he would send his own troops to Oxino City. If he won the battle, not only would he reap the benefits, he would also be able to consolidate his authority. More importantly, he would be able to effectively intimidate the nobles. This was a good thing that could satisfy all three goals. This was what the blind Grand Duke was thinking. However, there were some things that he couldn't say out loud, even to his own son. Firstly, he couldn't leave any evidence for others to talk about. Secondly, he could use this opportunity to teach his son a lesson and let him understand the scheming of an emperor. All right, you may leave. Knowing that he had asked all the questions he needed to ask, the Grand Duke of Blindness waved his hand with a smile. The blind Grand Duke could see everything clearly because his wisdom was unmatched. Moreover, his mind was very clear. However, the nobles couldn't do it. Just as Ivan thought, they were a group of short-sighted people. Once they saw benefits, they were like flies that saw an egg with a crack. That kind of desire couldn't be controlled. Maxim, who had been elected, was also very pleased with himself. This time, in order to support him in the war, the nobles had given him a lot of military funds. Although it was said that after the war, he would have to divide the victory according to the nobles' investment. However, he was still satisfied with the nobles' actions. At least he could see the nobles' support for him. After reaching Maxim's position, it would be impossible to say that he didn't have any ambition. He also wanted to become a high and mighty existence like the blind Grand Duke. To achieve this, he had to achieve great results. Previously, when he faced the Mongol cavalry, he lacked confidence. However, now that he was facing the Han people who were known as two-legged sheep, he had no reason to be afraid. In his view, as long as his army caused trouble, the Han people would very likely flee in fear. He could even win without fighting. With great confidence and excitement, Maxim gathered his troops and set out 5 days later. His target was Oxino City. At this time, in Oxino City, the Third Star Army had finished replenishing its troops. Under the temptation of extremely high pay and treatment, no less than 20,000 young and middle-aged commoners joined the army. Even so, there were many youths who weren't chosen for various reasons and left with regrets. This was the benefit of having a strong economy. Many transport teams came from the Far East region. While they brought large amounts of food, they also brought salt, sugar, iron pots, soy sauce, vinegar, cotton clothes, and other necessities for the commoners. When these things appeared in the shops of Oxino City, who knew how many commoners were blinded by them? It was to the point that every shop had to be guarded by the 5-Star Army. Even so, there were still many commoners pacing back and forth in front of the shops. They didn't have the Chinese currency that the 5-Star Army had mentioned, so they naturally couldn't buy these goods. However, even if they couldn't buy them, they could still look at them. Of course, not all commoners had the ability to buy them. For example, there were some new recruits who had just joined the 5-Star Army. In order to encourage them and set an example, Wu Sheng and Tian, who discussed and gave out a portion of their allowance. Just like that, they had the first batch of customers. When the White Russian and Mongolian recruits wearing clean and tidy military uniforms took out their Chinese coins and bought some daily necessities that made people envious, the other commoners were in an uproar. They only hated that their children hadn't been accepted by the 5-Star Army. Otherwise, they would have been part of the people who had these good things. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.